You want toxic people to stop bothering you. Here's the truth. They thrive on reaction. They live off your energy, off your frustration, off the way you explain yourself over and over, hoping they'll finally understand. But here's the catch. They already understand. They just don't care. And the moment you realize that is the moment you get your power back. Toxic people thrive on your reactions because that is the only way they know how to feel powerful. And when you begin to notice the patterns in their behavior, you start to understand that they are not looking for solutions. They are looking for sparks, for energy, for drama, and for the feeling of control they get when they see you lose yours. They study the way you respond, they test the limits, and every time you explain yourself too much, every time you raise your voice, every time you let them pull you into a fight you never wanted, they collect those moments as victories. It's not about misunderstanding you. It's about keeping you trapped in a cycle where you are always defending yourself and they are always on offense. That's why over-explaining is not helping. It's handing them ammunition. The more words you give them, the more they twist, the more they manipulate, and the more they convince you that somehow you are the problem, when deep down you know the truth, but the constant back and forth starts to wear down your confidence. Think about how many times you've walked away from a toxic conversation, replaying everything you said, wishing you could have phrased it better, wishing you had stayed calmer, wishing they would finally just understand where you were coming from. But here's the thing, they already understand. Toxic people are not confused, they are committed. They are committed to misunderstanding you because that keeps them in control. If they admitted they understood, they would lose the leverage of making you feel like you are never clear enough, never calm enough, never reasonable enough. That's the trap. And that's why the best move is not to try harder, but to stop feeding the system altogether. When you stop reacting, something shifts. At first, they might push harder. They might raise the volume. They might throw accusations because they feel the loss of control slipping through their fingers. But if you stay firm, if you choose silence over shouting, if you choose calmness over chaos, they run out of fuel. Your reaction is their oxygen, and when you cut off the supply, the fire burns itself out. That doesn't mean you suppress your feelings or pretend you're okay with their behavior. It means you stop offering your energy where it will never be respected. You can acknowledge what is happening, you can recognize the manipulation, and then you can decide not to give it the reaction it is demanding. That decision is where your power lies. Toxic people are like fishermen with bait. They dangle the words, the accusations, the provocations in front of you, waiting for you to bite so they can reel you back into the game. But you don't have to bite. You can let the bait sit there untouched, and when they realize you're no longer playing, they have nothing left. They either have to change their approach or they move on to someone else who is still willing to engage. The cycle only works if you participate, and the moment you stop participating, you break it. It sounds simple, but it requires strength because your instinct will be to defend yourself, to clarify, to prove you're not wrong, to demand they finally see your perspective. But strength in this context is restraint. Strength is holding your tongue when everything in you wants to fight back. Strength is protecting your peace, even if they are throwing chaos right in your face. Over time, when you practice not reacting, you notice something important. You start to feel lighter. You stop wasting energy on arguments that go nowhere. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head, trying to prepare for the next attack. You stop feeling drained every time their name shows up on your phone. That is the real victory. You win by not playing. And the more consistent you are, the more they realize you are no longer an easy target. Toxic people thrive in environments where others are reactive and emotional because that gives them power. When you remove yourself from that environment emotionally, they lose that power completely. It doesn't mean they'll disappear instantly. Some will try harder. Some will push buttons you didn't know you had. Some will use guilt or anger to pull you back in. But remember, every attempt is proof that your silence is working. They don't fight harder when they're winning. They fight harder when they're losing control. If you can outlast those final attempts, if you can hold your ground when they try to bait you the most, eventually the noise quiets down. They either adjust to the new boundary or they leave to find someone else who will play along. Either way, you win because you refuse to give them what they wanted most, your reaction. And this isn't about becoming cold or heartless. It's about protecting yourself from people who only take and never give. It's about recognizing that your peace is more valuable than their drama. It's about finally understanding that you don't have to convince anyone of your worth, especially not someone who has shown you repeatedly that they don't care. When you stop reacting, you reclaim your energy, you reclaim your confidence, and you reclaim the freedom to focus on the things and people who actually deserve you. Set your boundary once, enforce it with silence and consistency, and you'll take away their power over your peace, because toxic people only operate where rules are flexible and lines are blurred. The moment they sense they can cross a boundary without consequence, they make it a habit. At first, it's small, it looks harmless, maybe even disguised as a joke, but every time you allow it, every time you let it slide, you are training them that your no does not really mean no. And the dangerous part is they thrive in that space, the gray area where they can test how far you'll bend until you break. The only way to shut that down is to establish a boundary once, clearly, and then hold it without wavering. When you do this, you are communicating without shouting, without repeating yourself, without trying to convince them. Your consistency does all the talking. Boundaries are not about changing them. They are about protecting you. Toxic people do not like boundaries because boundaries strip them of control. They don't want you deciding what you will and won't accept. They want to keep deciding for you. But when you make it clear that their words don't move you and their manipulation doesn't shake you, you shift the power dynamic. The line is drawn, and the strength is in your refusal to erase or redraw it just to keep the peace. Peace at the cost of your self-respect is not peace, it's surrender. Real peace comes from knowing you have a standard and that you can enforce it calmly and consistently, no matter how they react. At first, toxic people will push against your boundary. They may mock it, dismiss it, call you unreasonable, or even accuse you of being the problem. This is the test. They are trying to see if your boundary is real or if it's just words. Anyone can announce a boundary, but the real difference is in enforcing it. That enforcement is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is not a long speech. It's a quiet decision followed by consistent action. Silence is a weapon because it denies them the emotional reaction they are begging for. Silence communicates, I am not engaging with this. Silence communicates, that door is closed. Silence shows them you are not open for negotiation on your peace. And over time, silence and consistency become the language they cannot argue with. Consistency is what breaks the cycle. You cannot set a boundary one day and abandon it the next. You cannot say no once and yes the next time out of guilt. That inconsistency is exactly what toxic people exploit. They see inconsistency as weakness, as proof that if they push long enough, you will eventually cave. But when you hold the same line over and over again, when your yes means yes and your no means no, they begin to realize there is no opening left. That is where the power shift happens. It's not about one big dramatic confrontation. It's about the small, repeated moments where you refuse to budge. Those moments build up into a wall they cannot climb. Think about how children test parents. They ask the same question over and over in different ways, hoping for a different answer. If the parent caves once, the child learns persistence works. Toxic people operate the same way. If you set a boundary but break it even once, they learn persistence will eventually wear you down. But if you remain consistent, if every push is met with the same firm response, eventually they stop asking. Toxic people are not interested in people they cannot control, and your consistency is the proof they cannot control you. It is important to understand that boundaries are not about punishment. They are not about making the other person pay or feel small. Boundaries are about respect, self-respect first and foremost. When you hold a boundary, you are telling yourself that your peace, your time, your energy, and your well-being are worth protecting. And when you live by that standard, other people start to recognize it too. Toxic people may hate it, but healthy people will respect it. You start to notice that your circle changes, that the people who stay in your life are the ones who can exist without crossing lines, without draining your energy, without feeding off your reactions. Another piece of this is detaching from the outcome. You cannot control whether a toxic person will respect your boundary, but you can control what you do when they don't. That's where consistency matters. If you say, I don't allow this, and then allow it, your words lose all meaning. If you say, I won't engage when you yell, and then engage when they yell, your boundary is erased. But if you calmly walk away every single time They learn you are serious. Detachment is not coldness, it's clarity. It's knowing that you can only be responsible for your own actions, not theirs. And when you detach from needing them to understand or approve, you stop giving them the leverage they depend on. Silence also protects you from being pulled into traps. Toxic people love arguments because arguments blur the line between right and wrong. The louder the fight, the easier it is for them to twist the narrative and make you question yourself. But silence removes the stage. Silence says, "You don't get to pull me into this." Silence keeps your clarity sharp, and paired with consistency, silence is a shield that toxic people cannot penetrate. Over time, this practice builds your confidence. The first time you enforce a boundary, it feels uncomfortable, maybe even scary, because you are used to giving in or explaining yourself. But with every repetition, you get stronger. You realize you don't have to raise your voice to be heard. You don't have to justify your choices to people who don't respect them. You don't have to live in constant defense mode. Your consistency becomes your strength, and your silence becomes your freedom. When you set a boundary once and hold it with silence and consistency, toxic people realize they no longer have a foothold. They cannot climb into your mind, they cannot stir up your emotions, and they cannot disturb your peace. They lose the power they thought they had because you refuse to play the game. And once they realize the game is over, they stop wasting their energy on you. They may move on, they may back off, they may try different tactics, but none of it works when you hold firm. That's the ultimate shift. When you stop bending, they stop controlling.